This morning, we are very pleased to welcome Argyle, your reputation and communication experts. We are joined this morning by Gabriella and Tatiana, and we are so looking forward to their presentation about how the pandemic is ruining everything. So very curious to find out more about this. And again, please welcome Gabrielle and Tatiana from Argyle.
Hello, good morning. I hear it's a beautiful day in Grande, Prairie, which is really nice. I think we've all been looking forward to having this warm spring days. And so the title of our presentation today is "The Pandemic is Ruining Everything," but we wanted to add a bit of a positive tone to that. How can we make it better? How can we make, lemonade with the lemons that we've been given? So we'll take you through the presentation, and we hope that you'll get some practical tools for your businesses, given the current scenario that we're still working with. And so your team for today, as Tom said, it's myself, Gabriela Gonzalez. I am a director based in Calgary. I am in Argyle's communication and engagement practice. I've worked in government. I worked in agency, working with many businesses like yours. I help them navigate the PR world, but also doing and facilitating a lot of public engagement. And I'm joined by my colleague, Tatiana. I'll pass it over to her.
Hi, everybody. So recognizing a lot of familiar faces. I actually am from Grande Prairie, so lovely to meet anybody I have not met before. Hi, Mom. I saw you smiling at me there. So lovely to see you too. So I'm Tatiana Duclo, a consultant with Argyle based in Calgary. I've been with Argyle for almost 3 years now. And I moved to Calgary in 2014 to attend journalism school. And now with my years at Argyle, my expertise and focus is with media relations, stakeholder engagement as part of our engagement practice, and that strategic communications and issues in crisis management with our corporate and public affairs team. All right, I'll turn it back to Gabriella, who's going to walk us through the first half of our presentation, and then I will take it for the second half.
Perfect. Thank you. So the agenda for today, we want to talk about acknowledge where we were a year ago. I think that's really important to do. Talk about where we are now. How does this impact your business? And then we're going to go through a couple of scenarios that we think could be, very real situations that could happen to your business or may have already happened, and talk about, what kind of advice we would give our clients. Then we're going to go about, being COVID compassionate. We're finding that being compassion and empathy are even more important in the pandemic days. So we'll walk through that. What does it mean to ask for feedback, and how can that be done properly? We'll do a quick summary and key takeaways, and then we'll open it up for questions. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, there are things that sort of really hit that you find really interesting and want to comment, feel free to type that in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. But there will be a sort of a proper opportunity to answer those questions towards the end. All right, so where we were a year ago, I want you to think back to exactly a year ago. What were you doing when the lockdown was announced? Were you at work? Were you at home? How did you feel? I know I felt anxious. I had a 2-year-old at the time, and having her being sent home and have to work from home while also watching her was incredibly challenging. But I didn't think that would last very long. I thought, we would be in lockdown for 2 to 3 weeks and then we would go back to normal. That was not the case. And maybe in your case, maybe you had to close your doors to your business. Maybe you have to pivot and go online, and really be strategic about what kind of investments you were going to make if you went online. If you had to shift to just door to door delivery or providing services. So I want you to take a moment, pause, think back 365 plus days ago, and where you were on that March day. Now, I want you to take a moment and think about where we are now. Did you think you were going to make it this far? What did you have to do to get, to survive during that very challenging period? Perhaps you had kids at home. Perhaps you, again, had to close your doors and then reopen and then close again. So I think it's really important that, as human beings, as business owners, that we take a moment to pause and think about how far we've come, how resilient we have become, and how quickly we have to pivot to this virtual world of doing business online, but while still maintaining some in-person presence, obviously as complying with public health guidelines. And there's light at the end of the tunnel. We're seeing obviously vaccinations happening. We're seeing restrictions being eased. Perhaps we've been able to welcome back all of your customers. If you have a store, perhaps you've been able to grow your business because you've been able to reach more customers online. And perhaps you've added some communications expertise to your team, and perhaps you've taken that on. You're sending newsletters as a way to communicate with your clients. And so we really, as we think about what does life look like after the pandemic, we think it's important to take those practices that were developed in the pandemic in an online world. Make sure you carry them forward, communicating with your customers in new ways. That's super important. And perhaps you've, again, going to be able to reach customers beyond Grande Prairie, in Alberta, or internationally. But COVID is not the only thing that's happening in our lives. We know it's been, the focus of media. It's been had a huge impact in our lives. But there are other things happening. We know, there's supply chain and travel risk and all the implications that come with that. We know that diversity, equity, and inclusion is really important in people's lives these days. Things like the Black Lives Movement. And so it's really important that you acknowledge as an employer that your employees, yourself, you're grappling with all these issues that are even amplified in a pandemic situation where people are feeling on edge, anxious. And so that it's important that when you're thinking about things like diversity and inclusion, that you need to, if you're going to make a statement, if you're going to take a stand, that you do it in a meaningful way, in a way that is thoughtful, and that actually there's action behind some of those words that you may be using. So we want to sort of make it real now and talk in terms of how does this impact you? What are some scenarios that we'll go through some scenarios that we think could be you could experience in Grande Prairie, things that are very local, and ways on how you could deal with them, how you could respond to them based on our experience. So we've prepared 2 scenarios, and then for the first scenario, we have a bit of a twist. We want to opening up to you and want you to think about, what are some situations that you may have experienced, or do you think you could experience, and then we'll be happy to. So you can think about that through our presentation, and then at the end, sort of in the second half in the Q&A, we'll be happy to answer any, address that scenario that you have experienced or you think you could experience, give you some practical tips on how you could address that situation. We're not HR experts, we are PR experts, so more on the communications front. But we know that reputation is very important to business, and so we come at it from that reputational lens and what that means for your business. So on to scenario 1. So last Thursday was a regular COVID sunny day at your business until a customer entered without wearing a mask. There was a signage posted at the door mandating mask wearing as per provincial guidelines. Your employee politely asked the customer to wear a mask, and they became irate, yelling about their freedom and rights. Their companion recorded the interaction and posted it on Facebook, telling people not to go to your business. I'm sure you may have, if this has not happened to you, you may have read about in the media about a situation like this one. And it is a tough situation, right? How do you handle that from an employer perspective, from your employees' perspective, and as well as from your reputation and customers? So what we would recommend our clients in this case, acknowledge that the post, if it's been posted on Facebook, you've perhaps been tagged, or someone mentioned that your business was included in this video. So acknowledge it with the post. You want to make sure that you acknowledge what happened, that you told the customer to abide, or your employee told the customer to abide by the regulations, that you understand the customer was upset, but however, we all need to do our part to create a safe environment for customers and employees, that you regret any inconvenience that this may have caused, but everyone is doing their part to get through these difficult times. And so we have included here a little blurb, and I hope you can see it on the right there. Perhaps you can zoom in if you like, just about a suggested statement that you could issue on Twitter and Facebook. And it's acknowledging what happened, again, being empathetic, having that sort of COVID emotion, but understand that we all need to do our part to follow guidelines to keep everyone safe. But we do want to point out that you don't want to call out call out the customer for being rude. You don't want to single anyone out. That's not your role. And also, you don't want to say anything negative about the customer's behavior, acknowledging that they did not follow provincial guidelines, but that it's you don't want to single them out. All right, over to scenario number 2. You recently had an outbreak at your business. It is a small community, and most residents and businesses knew of this outbreak. Alberta Health Services has approved for you to reopen. How do you announce this reopening to make people feel safe to return to your business? This may be something that happened again to your business, or you've heard about it. We've heard about a number of meat processing plants in Alberta that have experienced outbreaks. And here we have some example of this happening, right? Some the Red Deer meat processing plant. And what we saw in those situations was that different employees were speaking to media every day, and that just kept the story going on the media. We would be reading about it almost every day. And from an employer perspective, from a business perspective, that's not great. It's not great when your business is landed on the front page of a newspaper because of an outbreak, and your employees continue speaking out about this issue. On the opposite end of the spectrum, in terms of how a company managed from a communications perspective an outbreak at their facility, is McDonald's. And they took a very different approach. They were very honest about the issue. They acknowledged it, but then they mobilized and said, we've met the requirements to reopen, and we're being transparent. Information sharing is incredibly important. And especially in a difficult situation that is rapidly evolving, you want to be sharing information, obviously without compromising employee privacy or safety, but you want to show that you're taking action swiftly and that you're complying with the local regulations. And so in this case, what we would recommend that you would do, as you've said, you immediately show compassion for your employees, your customers. You want to show that you're taking care of them. That you're doing everything that you can within your power to make sure that they have the support that they need, that they're being taken care of in this difficult situation. Demonstrate that you're doing everything to get ready for the reopening, and to make sure that you maintain standards that comply with AHS, that you're going above and beyond if possible. So hand sanitizer everywhere your facility, making sure people are wearing masks and physical distance. So and don't take any of that communication for granted. You want to list every single one of the actions you're taking to make sure that you're showing your facility is safe. And as I said, be open and with your information, share, be transparent. You want to make sure that if there's misinformation out there as to sort of how big the outbreak was, if it was too many people or few people, you want to correct any misinformation and share exactly what the case was, what the issue was. And good way that we often recommend to our clients to communicate is through social media, especially in a rapidly evolving situation where you may not have all of the information, where you want to communicate quickly. Social media is a great tool to be to share that information, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook. We know that Facebook is still a primary way of communication where people turn to sort of for breaking news and to hear what's happening in the community. So we definitely recommend having that statements and updating it as needed on Facebook. So with that, I hope that was helpful. I hope that gave you some good tips on what to do should those situations happen to your business or another business. Now I'll pass it over to my colleague Tatiana to take us through the other part of the presentation.
Great, thanks, Gabriella. So here we're really going to dive into a lot more about that being COVID compassionate in our communications and how critical and important this is. And forgive me for trying to navigate the slides at the same time. So the COVID emotion is something that we really need to understand, and the COVID fatigue is real. It's by a raise of hands, for those I can see, how many people are feeling COVID fatigue? Now, if we're starting, everybody, okay. My hand would also go up. We're feeling really tired, right? And we're feeling probably more sensitive to things that we wouldn't feel that way in the past. Your milk is placed on the wrong shelf in your fridge, or something small just manages to nitpick at you just a little bit more. And so we really need to remember that everybody is really sensitive still, and that we really need to lead our communications with compassion. And our flexibility with the workforce is still going to be needed. The flexibility of your businesses is going to be needed. That adaptation is going to be continually ongoing. But we need to just have that mindset, and it can be hard when we're also emotionally charged, that to really bring back down and come back to that empathetic level. And so one of the other things is really trying not to get engaged. Sometimes it can be easy to become really heated if there's a Twitter troll out there, and it can be really tempting to want to fight and defend yourself. And that's something that it's good to take a step back and really take a look at that COVID and emotion piece. And so we're going to go through that a little bit, especially on social media. Apologies, I'm realizing this graphic is very blurry. But so one of the things that it says is that 28% of Americans admit to online trolling. If you can believe that, that is a very large part of the population that actually goes online to troll other people. I'm not shaming anybody if you do choose to go online and troll people. However, it's really important that when it comes to understanding emotion, it's also taking into account what comes down to your online presence. So it's not just your in-person interactions. And we know that trolls are out there, especially with COVID. There's way more time to get behind the screen. There is way more time to comment online. And that anonymous level really makes a lot of people feel more comfortable to share things that they maybe wouldn't otherwise. So it's hard to, it's easier said than done, but it's really, we want you to remember to not let it get to you. So you're never going to win in those situations. And it's really important to take a step back, to think about the compassionate side of things, even if you're so angry at what's being posted, and think about how your business image will look with what your response is. So sometimes we have no idea who's behind a screen. It could be someone who doesn't even know your business. And even if they do, you really want to just maintain that same level of compassionate, open communication efforts that Gabriella spoke to earlier. Stick to your facts, be very diplomatic in your response, and don't engage beyond that. Because at the end of the day, people are always going to be watching you over the troll. They're going to wait for a mistake that then they can share and make into a larger problem that then can damage your image and your business's reputation. And so one of the things that we also need to think about is understanding social presence. So this is on your own presence that you choose to put out into the internet world, and especially with the content that you might choose to produce. So how many people saw the Burger King UK ad for Women Belong in the Kitchen? Quite a few. I see some heads shaking. So one thing that this was very close to, or was on International Women's Day, and Burger King UK decided to put out this "Women Belong in the Kitchen." As you can see, that somebody has put it with this lovely graphic of the Burger King icon, and you really need to think through your statement sometimes to be more thought out and considered before putting something like this out. They were trying to make a statement. They were really trying to do something that they thought was humorous. Humor can be really risky a lot of the times in communications. It's not something that we advise lightly usually. It takes a lot of thought and strategic thinking into how to approach that. This got put out there and it completely missed the point and the focus. That the component of this was that they were offering a scholarship for women who wanted to go into culinary school and become chefs. And that's such a key and critical piece. However, Women Belong in the Kitchen did not sit well with the audience. And so it's really important to understand that context of your audience. What are they going to think, and step into their shoes? And this really leads us to that importance of asking for feedback. And so it's important to not just wait until you get feedback. A lot of the times we don't normally hear from people until they're mad. So most often the Google reviews you see are when somebody has a poor experience. However, we really want to create a safe space for sharing feedback for businesses. And you have to work a lot harder for that positive, neutral feedback. I'm sure many of you have probably been asked by a business before to leave a Google review, and it's much more difficult to get up the energy to write that positive review sometimes than it is if you have a really poor experience. For example, when we saw the merge of the phone, or when Rogers, Telus, and Bell were all offering that crazy deal and everybody wanted it, there was a ton of negative tweets and coverage going around. However, if you were to step back a little bit and be a little bit more neutral about it and have been positive, we wouldn't have seen that in the media. That was something that wouldn't have made a stir. And so with that, we want to understand relationships and why they're so important and why they're important for getting that feedback that we need. So this involves building your relationships with your customers and also your employees. So really developing those strong and trusted relationships, because that's how you create that safe space to get that feedback. We know that relationships are the heart of the work that businesses do. And they're there for both the good and the bad. A lot of the times your customers that are committed to you, they're going to stand by you. And so if you are able to invest into those relationships, make those personal connections, that's your best defense actually in having a trusted audience, gathering very genuine input and feedback on how your audience feels, especially maybe before you are to make a statement such as the one Burger King did. And so it's really important for you to consider those things and those relationships. And with that, it's also that urgency of outside in perspectives. So this is where we need to consider how others will feel and how what we communicate in the world will affect them. So when we saw that Burger King post, I personally felt like very alarmed and very unsure of what was happening in the world. The fact that women belong in the kitchen. I by no means feel that way, and I feel that I have a very great job. And so I was completely taken aback. And then when I got into reading it a little bit more, they didn't really take the time to understand how others would feel and what that would interact. And maybe if they did, they chose to go forward with it anyways, thinking, well, it's going to make that statement and catch eyes. But it ended up doing it in such a negative way. And so they ended up making headlines because it was negative. And that's not what we want for businesses. We want to make headlines for positive news. And so we're all experiencing COVID, but right now you're never going to hear about those people that go above and beyond, that are super positive. So we really need to make sure that we think about those outside in perspectives. We think about what our audience is going to see, what their perception of us is going to be, and how it's going to affect their view of our image. And it's important that we remember to still be human and to maintain that compassion. A lot of our presentation really comes down to the importance of that empathy in your communications and making sure that you're very aligned with how people are feeling so that they then become aligned with your business. If you saw recently the news article about the individual that is in a long-term care home and she wasn't able to pay or return her Rogers supplies, and they ended up charging her a very expensive bill. That was something that was completely avoidable. They could have easily rectified it. However, they didn't do the right thing until they were bullied into it. And that's not good for your business image. It's something that it's easy to just do the right thing sometimes. And maybe you won't make the headline with it, but at the end of the day, that relationship will really be built with your customer. And so in times of crisis and change, so we really fear lacking autonomy or influence over the events affecting our lives. And so we really need to understand, especially now, that fear is really running everything. And that can help us navigate how we communicate. It's really tough some days. I know that you can feel fearful yourself. And you hear one thing about vaccines and it's great and the world is looking up, and then you hear another about a COVID variant, and there's a very polarized differences and perspectives that are coming out. And so we really need to ask ourselves, how are our relationships with the people around us? How are they going to feel? What can we do to make them feel safe? As Gabriella mentioned earlier, how can we be transparent to build trust? If you have an outbreak, that showing that transparency can really make people feel more safe rather than feeling stressed about the fact that maybe you had an outbreak. And so with that, we want to look at kind of where we're headed and where we're going. And points for anybody that sees the third party in this photo, because I did not until yesterday, and it caused quite a stir. And so if you look actually in the middle, There's this lovely cat. I had no idea that was in there, but this just shows the world that we're in right now. It's zany, it's crazy. Nothing is normal, and we are anything but close to returning to normal, because it's going to be a different normal than what we're used to. And with that, we know that we're headed to that vaccine brick wall. There's no way of knowing who is vaccinated and who isn't. Some may assume that that vaccine means a get out of jail free card. It means that we just get to head back out and hit up the club, head out to the restaurants, and visit all our family. Unfortunately, it probably doesn't. We've seen a lot of information coming out that with vaccines, we're still going to need masks for a while. We're still going to need, social distancing, and there's going to be restrictions in place for a while. And this is going to cause a lot more tension, a lot more stress and frustration. And that's something to really take into account as we progress forward, and how you're communicating as a business is to understand that this is how people are going to be feeling. They're going to want to come back in and say, I'm vaccinated. I don't need to wear a mask now. But unfortunately, that doesn't mean that it's the same for everybody. And we need to maintain that communication for our businesses of being transparent, being open, and instilling why we still need to do these things, that we're all in this together. And things will go back to this, I hate using the term new normal, just because now this all feels normal after a year. But it's going to take a while. And I know this vaccine brick wall seems very negative and down, but we're going to look at some positive and good outlooks. And in this meantime, it's really important for us to stay super innovative and communicate how we're creating different and new solutions for our customers. Gabriella asked at the beginning, did you move to an online store? Maybe your business had a bit of a change that's actually been for the better. Maybe it's been a great asset for your business. And so it's important that we're going to be continuing these solutions even post pandemic life, because now we're all getting used to them and understanding that there are a lot of great opportunities outside of what we used to do. And with these innovative solutions, here's a couple examples. Companies are stepping up and outside of the box in many different ways. So one of our clients, Johnsonville, they hosted a virtual barbecue on Facebook Live as a way to capture their audience last summer, spread the love of barbecue, really promote their brand. And even though people couldn't gather, they were able to make it really inclusive. And it actually ended up becoming a larger event because people could join in from across the country. They didn't have to physically be there, which was a very cool and innovative way to do that. The YWCA here in Calgary, they held their annual Whisper Gala. And this time you were actually able to order a local charcuterie board, have it delivered to your house. You then joined in virtually and were able to still take part in kind of that camaraderie, usually the dining and the wine that you get with those types of events, still enjoy those pieces. And these innovative solutions and the progress and the difference that these brands are showing is really being compassionate and thinking about their audience to still get them involved. And the future is still optimistic, and we're definitely not the only ones that think so. So our client Scotiabank actually released their most recent business outlook. And if you haven't had a chance to look, they did release their full report for Canada. But specifically for Alberta, 94% of the businesses that they surveyed were optimistic about the future. This, of course, doesn't speak to everybody with the sample that they surveyed. And you can read their methodology in the report, I should say that. And 60% believe that their businesses will also be changed for the better. There's these solutions and these different things that are coming up that we're able to now offer, and we still will be able to offer post-pandemic. Technology and hiring needs are actually increasing. And so the future is really looking up. It might feel like a really slow process right now, but we are going to get there. And so we have said a lot, and sorry, I feel like I was talking very fast to fit all of that in because I want to give us lots of ample time for questions. But the key takeaways that as we move on this path forward are to, really lead with empathy. So being as human as possible to our customers, our employees, and yourself. So you work hard for your business, and so you really need to be kind to you too. Take the time that you need to reflect and understand how you're feeling, and put yourself in your customer's shoes, but also make sure that you're taking into account how you feel about things with your business, what maybe you need to do to make yourself feel better and safer at your own business. Be open and honest in your communications. Be transparent with your audience. Demonstrate how you're adhering to guidelines, what you're doing to go above and beyond, and really help them feel safe. And really prepare for that innovation for the future, what that normal looks like. And maybe we need a new word for normal, because it's going to be anything but normal as we move forward. There's a lot of opportunity to really keep these traits of being courageous and leading with the things that we do and the communications efforts that we move forward with. And it can actually help us create a better and more trusted business in the future. And so one of the things that we've been talking a lot about at Argyle is that silence isn't golden. So especially if you're being called out online, we talked about acknowledging responses, however, of course, doing so in a diplomatic way. If you're called out by a news story, it's important to really be honest, to communicate in that sensitive way that considers the image of your business, and really builds trust with your people. And sometimes being silent can actually be to your detriment. However, you do have to be mindful, of course, of what we put out online, and silence is only golden if you are this guy, which is a troll. So we would love to have silence from trolls. However, they will always still be there. So this is where we need to find that balance of when we speak up in a diplomatic way and maintaining that kind of that transparent and honest communication, but without kind of giving into the anger that maybe some of these trolls will influence for us. So I know we went through a lot, and we want to open it up for any questions. And as Gabriella mentioned, if there's a scenario that has come up for you, or something you've experienced and you haven't figured out how to communicate, or maybe how you did communicate and you want to share it with us, we're more than happy to open up the floor for that.
Okay. Anybody have a question for our presenters?
Well, I will just say I'm not sure if anybody else saw this in the chat, but Tom's comment that a wise journalist once told him that if you're trying to be funny, leave no doubt. And that is so true. I cannot emphasize enough how risky humor can be. Sometimes it works really, really well. And I know that we're all trying to find some light in the tunnel right now, that it's like, oh, let's try to be funny. Really think twice about what it is. And if you find it's funny, maybe run it by a couple people. Just make sure that it makes sense. And just even that goes with your response. Janice, if you see something on Twitter and somebody makes a comment, it's probably easy to say something funny back. Let's really double check what we would say in those responses.
I covered a curling event in Fort Nelson in 1999, and a reporter who's actually from Grande Prairie, newspaper guy, he wrote a story or a column about the hotel room in Fort Nelson, and he was trying to be funny and talking about the basket that was left in the hotel room for them, like a gift basket and that sort of thing. And it's hard to describe, but he was trying to be sarcastically funny, but it came off as the whole town circling the wagons and taking major offense to this article. Now, this was just before the internet really took off, but we would go to a restaurant in Fort Nelson and everyone had a piece of paper. They had printed off this story off the internet, and everyone in town, and I'm not exaggerating, had this paper and is reading this paper in this restaurant. Well, this guy, they basically put him on a plane and got him out of there after a couple of days because it was not pretty. And that's when this other reporter that was there, he's from Calgary, and he said to me, he said, if you're going to be funny, leave no doubt, because you don't know how it's going to turn out. So you really do have to be careful with what you post and what you talk about, and because everyone has different opinions and viewpoints, and so
Absolutely. And especially, you're so right. And we're living in this very digital age now that it's so important to think twice before you post. 25 years ago, you would, share something with a friend, or talk about something and it wouldn't blow up on the internet like it does now. And we even have seen that with COVID itself. If we think back to H1N1 or SARS, the news was out there, but it was not as explosive as it is now. And now it's so easy for something to kind of get blown out of proportion or to get shared. And that is a great example of how even like pre-internet days, where the internet, you said, was not as common, people will still find a way to kind of attach on to those things. And those negative experiences are always going to really be amplified over the positive. If he had wrote a great article about how the gift basket they gave was so nice and he had such a pleasant experience and he wasn't sarcastic and was just very genuine about it, I'm sure nobody would have probably even brought it up. Maybe a few people would have said, nice piece. That's probably about it, right? But when we have those negative experiences, people are just amplified and they're on they get very upset and emotional, and then that emotion really triggers them to want to react in a different way than they would otherwise.
Yeah, well, this was a small town, and it was the first time that that they had hosted a major event, curling event, and so they were already kind of feeling a little, not inferior. That's probably not the right word, but just being very, cautious about, they wanted to really put on a really good show, and they did. It was an amazing event, and they treated us like gold. But then this comes out, and really the only place it really was in Grande Prairie. It was in the newspaper. It was just like a kind of an editorial, but that's how quickly it showed up in Fort Nelson. And yeah, so it was just a good reminder, and I always think back to that when it definitely changed the way I approach things. I know, and that was, like you said, 21 years ago. So.
And now with social media, I would say, that story would have probably gone viral, right? And just social media really amplifies those bad news, bad coverage. Those bloopers really go viral. So super, you need to be extra careful when you're making a public statement or posting as a business, and who you're affiliated with as a business, because it can carry beyond the Grande Prairie boundaries really easily.
Yeah, this was before Facebook, before Twitter, before LinkedIn, any of them. Like, it was just, the internet was in its infancy, and but people found it, and they found it quickly. So, oh well. Anybody else have anything they want to just talk about? Go ahead, Naomi.
I wanted to find out, so from your guys' perspective then, so with being brands and being a franchise, right? All the hotels are dealing with the experience of your guests constantly commenting that, well, that's not how things are done here, or that's not how things are done there. What would you say would be the best response to give to that guest? Because they don't understand that it is a franchise. It's independently owned by people all over the place. They associate it all with the same name. So what would you suggest on those?
I can start, and Tab, I think of we've seen during the pandemic different actual restrictions in different municipalities, and I think that that's very reminds us that everything is local. It's about what's happening in your backyard. And I would say, as the franchise, yes, as a company, you may be, you're part of a larger brand. And obviously you're following, what is indicated from head office, but you very much, you have to follow what's applicable to your own community. In some communities, masks are mandated and required. In others, it's sort of encouraged. So I would say, you're as a business, you're following what's sort of the local public health guidelines, while maintaining, obviously, the standards of service that customers would expect from a company. But you want to make sure that and so that the standard of service, the customer service level of care is important, but while abiding by local guidelines.
And can I just ask a clarifying question for that? Are you speaking to specifically the actual like guidelines? Or are you saying more like, I do know that with your hotel, for example, that there's certain things that you're supposed to kind of adhere to in terms of like the products that you offer in your rooms and like kind of the way things are done. Is that more what you're referring to, or are you more referring to
It's
coping?
both. It's both.
Oh,
So we experience, like, I'll have somebody that maybe stays in Hinton and they'll
mhm,
say, oh, well, in Hinton, our breakfast was closed down because that was our guidelines. And so we go into that at this time, our area, we can't have these certain things. But what we were finding as well was some of the hotels actually weren't following all the guidelines. And
mm,
unfortunately, them not following the guidelines put us all into a different state. So that was where I was spending more time explaining to people, unfortunately, these are our guidelines. We are trying to ensure that we're keeping you as safe as we can be. We want to make sure that we don't have you exposed to anyone, and try to go that route. And so that was probably our biggest experience that we were dealing with.
mhm. And I would say that, that response that you have is really aligned with what you should say, right? It's kind of that kill them with kindness attitude where it's just thank you so much for the feedback. That's really appreciated. However, we are choosing to adhere to what our restrictions or what our guidelines are. The provincial mandates are that the masks are required, and our local municipality specifies that we cannot do this, and we're trying to keep you as safe as possible. So really, just kind of reaffirming the fact that it's not speaking bad of the other organizations or the other branches that have done those things. It's just reaffirming what yours are doing and the why. And so, it'd be easy to say, well, I can't believe they did that. And like, oh my God, like I'm going to call Hinton and be like, what are you doing? And that's not what we would ever want to react, right? That's a very reactionary. And we want to be a little bit more proactive in that and saying, thanks so much. And I do understand where you're coming from. However, this is what we need to follow, and just being very that fact based with what you have, and still it sounds like too your response has been very compassionate, saying unfortunately, like this is what we're doing, and I do understand that. Even just saying that unfortunately is acknowledging the fact that you see how they're feeling, and I think that's a really good point for that. Gabriella, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, don't, you don't always have to comment on what other people are doing, right? You could, I don't have, I cannot comment on that, but here's what we're doing, and here's how we're following the guidelines. Here's what we're doing to make sure that you have a pleasant stay, a good experience with us, given the constraints that we're all facing, and especially in a hotel capacity. You want, people are looking for it to get away, to just get, a break and relax and sort of decompress. And you want to make sure it's a pleasant experience while given the but still working within the constraints that we're faced. But also even for the city, you can't comment on how that march was organized and what process they went through. They didn't get a permit. They did not follow sort of proper procedure. But I'm not going to comment on that event.
And I think people get afraid sometimes of saying, I have no comment. You see that in TV and people, no comment, no comment. And that type of thing is usually looked at like, oh, well, they have nothing to say. But really, when we talk about that silence isn't golden piece, that's the part of kind of breaking that silence. Now we're at the point that if you stay silent, that is way more like jarring, that there's something else that you don't want to share. Whereas if you say, I cannot speak to that, that's 100% okay. Even in our media training that we conduct with a lot of our spokespeople, it really focuses on that if they ask you a question outside the scope of what we're talking about, you can say, I cannot speak to that. However, I can speak to this, and really tying it back. And that's something we call bridging, actually. And so you want to make sure that you bridge it back to what you are doing, what your key messages are. And so, I can't speak to what the Best Western in Hinton is doing. However, at the Grande Prairie one, this is what we are doing, and here's the reasons why. And it really just comes back to your focus, and pulls that away from other people. But don't ever be afraid to say, I cannot speak to that. You know what? Politicians get asked that all the time. They get asked what their thoughts are on this and that, and it's easy sometimes to have a response because everybody has an opinion. But sometimes when you say, I can't speak to that, and you genuinely cannot speak to it, we can't comment on other businesses. We can't speak to what other PR firms do, and we never would. That's the safest answer for you to go with. Great.
That's a good conversation. Sometimes it's nice to just be able to talk things through and get other opinions and viewpoints. And
Yeah, and we have a nice small group here, which is nice. That if anybody
Yeah.
has any other questions, does that answer your question, and also Janice, or your question you feel answered? Okay, great. And you can call me later, Mom, if you really have a question. I can answer that for you anytime.
Oh, she's got an in.
Share her phone number, Mom, for all of
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll put it on Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Anything else? I mean, we do just want to say thank you also everybody for taking some time out of your day to join us, and thank you to both the City of Grande Prairie and the Chamber of Commerce here for having us. We're actually hoping to do another session on businesses reopening later on in the spring here, and it's been great just to have some time to really connect with everybody, and our door is always open, for our clients. If there's ever anything you need, we're happy just to jump on the phone and talk things through. And we always offer that to even non-clients as well. So
well, we were pleased to find out more about Argyle and what you guys do, and it's wonderful working with you, and we look forward to doing it again and some more collaborations, and really appreciate your input. We appreciate everyone joining us this morning, and again, if you do have any other questions, Gabrielle and Taddy are I'm sure available, that we can forward your questions to them if you were a little shy about talking about it here, and but we can they're always available, and again, we do appreciate them jumping on board with us, and we look forward to another presentation from them probably in April sometime. So thanks everyone, enjoy your weekend, and we will talk to everyone soon.